everybody. SAS presents the history of video games. Just have to put a little code in here. Up, up, down, down, left, right. Okay, start. I don't like this. Alright, let's start with the beginning, with the birth of video games. First there was space, then there was Space War, which was created in 1961 by Russell here. His friends called him Slug, and they were a bunch of nerds at MIT, members of the Tech Model Railroad Club. They like to mess with computers and trains. I'm not really sure how they even combined them, but their favorite computer to mess with was one that no one knew. It was so complex, no one knew what to do with it. And so they loved to mess with the PDP-1, which was an expensive machine to be wasting. And there were only actually 4 of them available to civilians anywhere in the country. And so Space War was actually amazingly ahead of its time for the first game. It's computing inertia of the ships as they thrust, the gravitational field of the sun in the middle as these two ships battle each other. There's an accurate star map going through the background. And you have hyperspace, so you can disappear and reappear and take your chances with that. So, how much money did Russell make from Space War? Nothing. Because it's not a very viable product when there's only 4 computers in the world that can run it. But it was very popular among super nerds, and it did become a piece of test software that was shipped on every PDP-1 that was out there, and that does become important later. Okay, in 1966, Ralph here is a brilliant engineer working for a defense contractor, and he's so brilliant that they really let him do whatever he wants in his spare time. And so he starts messing around with this idea of using televisions and transistors to make games, and this stuff's going to be a lot more affordable. But he doesn't really know what a game is, per se. Like, one of his first games that I love is like, there's a blue cube on the screen, and you pound a button as fast as you can, and if you can pound that button fast enough, it turns red, and you keep pounding the button, it's red, and oh, I'm getting tired, and oh, that was a fun game. But after he keeps at it for a while, he does come up with ping pong, not to be confused with Pong. We're not there yet. But it's close, it's close. And this is actually a product. This is something that someone might be able to buy. So they go to Magnavox, who just makes televisions at this point, and they said, okay, we'll buy it. And the very first video game product comes out in 1971, the Odyssey, which had 12 versions of tennis, which really you couldn't fool anyone. It's just tennis. And he goes on to invent Simon, receive a lot of awards, and is generally considered the father of video games. Alright, we're going to rewind a little bit to one other very important person. This is Nolan at the University of Utah in 1962. He's exposed to Space War because that's one of the other 4 colleges in the country that has it. And when he leaves school, he goes to work in an engineering firm, and he promptly just rips off Space War and creates Computer Space, which is a pretty crappy version of Space War. It works decently, but the engineers there are impressed. They say, okay, let's try to sell it. So they put it in a cabinet, and we're going to sell it to people who have, pinball amusement parlors, and they have pinball machines now. There's nothing like this. There's no computer game. And it goes out there, and it's pretty much a total failure because people can't figure out what the fuck's going on. And the rumor is there was an instruction sheet that sat next to it that was 10 pages long. But Nolan, of course, blames the engineering firm for the really weird marketing that didn't go too well with the game. So he leaves there, and in 1972, Nolan here forms his own company called SysG, which is the word for the alignment of 3 celestial bodies. But unfortunately, or very fortunately, there's a California candle company that already has that name, so we can't use that. So he looks to his favorite board game, Go, in which the word for checkmate is Atari. Alright, so, the first arcade hit. So, Atari, first they get rid of their horrible first logo and get one that we all have some affection for, and he rents a warehouse in Santa Clarita, and first guy he hires is this brilliant young engineer named Alan, probably about 10 years before this photograph. And Nolan says to Alan, hey, we've got this deal with GE. They hired us to make an arcade game version of Pong, and I want you to get cracking, I want you to make it. Now, what Alan didn't know is that was complete bullshit. The contract did not exist at all, he just wanted to challenge him to make something. So, Alan gets cracking, and rather than just make the exact same thing as ping pong, he makes it better. He makes Pong. And what he's changed here, it's not that huge, but it really makes it a lot more fun. He added score, which we didn't have before, so it becomes a game. And he also added the idea that if the ball hits the top of your paddle, it'll go this way. If it hits the bottom of your paddle, it'll go that way. So it adds a lot more strategy to it. And they're like, we think this is fun, but we don't know. We had a bad experience with computer space. So they whip up this little cabinet, and they put it in Andy Capp's Tavern nearby. And they see, well, how's this going to do? And the rumor goes that a week later, the owner of the tavern calls up Nolan, and he says, you know, weirdest thing, I opened up today, and these guys walked in, and they didn't buy a drink. They went straight to your machine. I've never seen anything like that. And now it's broken, so you maybe want to come take a look at it. So Alan goes over to look at it, and when he opens it up, coins fall out. It was just broken because it was completely filled with money. And so they're like, okay, great, we can do this. So in 1971, they rent an abandoned roller skater rink, hire any moron off the street, and they make 2,500 Pong machines. In 1972, supposedly if you visited during this time period, you could get high just from walking around the factory floor, but they still managed to make 8,000 more of them, and Atari's really got a business on their hands. Which, and as a nice side effect, the Odyssey also starts making a lot of money because of the reverse. Now tennis is popular, and now everybody wants to make a tennis game. So our next chapter, anything but fucking tennis. So by 1976, there are over 70 crappy tennis machines out there, and the market is really, really saturated. Atari's been making a bunch of cabinets, most of which are more memorable for their ridiculous posters than they are for the games themselves. This also was the time period where Nolan hired this dirty, stinky hippie named Steve to work on a game called Breakout, who really he got his friend Steve to do all the work and ripped him off. But Nolan's like, no, I think the money's in the home market. I think if we can get past tennis, that's going to be great. So he says to Alan, see what you can do on that. So he gets cracking and whips up some prototypes and creates the guts for the video computer system, or what they call the VCS, or what you probably remember as the Atari 2600. Yeah. The beginning. And so this is also the first video game console to do the thing they do with razors, which is, we'll sell this thing really cheap, and this was cheap at the time, and we'll really make our money on the cartridges, and that's where we'll make our margins. So they get a deal with Sears to get the product out there, and it has a modest launch, modest, you know, it's successful enough, but the money for this had to come from somewhere. So Nolan sells Atari to Warner Communications for $28 million. And he's still working for Atari at this time, but he's kind of slacking, he's not showing up a lot, and it's because he seems more interested in that other project with the furry robots. And right about now, he opens Showtime, Showbiz Pizza and Chuck E. Cheese's. There's a lot of name confusion there. And he's come up with a really great business model, which is, you know, parents sit and watch the robots while you very slowly cook your very crappy pizza, and the kids spend a lot of money on video games. And it's a perfect time for this because we're about to enter the golden age of arcade games. So in the next couple years, a lot of very exciting things start to happen in arcade games. In 1978, Taito, in Japan, they released Space Invaders, which is a hell of a leap forward. And tremendously stressful game. And it's so popular that the Japanese government has to triple their production of 100 yen coins because they're all disappearing. Also, someone finally makes a version of Space War that actually plays well. And what I love is it took 16 years for the technology to catch up to the first game. But it's really enjoyable that the one ship looks like the Enterprise. And this game does pretty good. Atari sees that, and so they rip off Space War again, but all they do is take out the other ship and put in a bunch of rocks. And this one, of course, is a mega hit for Atari. Meanwhile, over in Japan, this guy works for Namco, this is Toru, and he's thinking, gosh, video games are so violent, it's all a lot of killing, and women don't like them because women don't like killing. And he's like, what do women like to do? They like to eat. So, while he's eating a pizza one day, he looks down and he says, that's my character, that's Pac-Man. And so, Pac-Man's created, although at first he's called Pac-Man, but that name is changed over a serious concern over how easy it is to vandalize that. And when Pac-Man comes to America, it becomes the #1 grossing game of all time. It makes the most money of any game ever in the arcades. Fantastic. And starts Pac-Mania, which was a crazy... Whoa, you weren't supposed to see that, yeah. It produces Pac-Mania and a lot of bizarre side effects that you find in Google image search when you're looking for Pac-Mania. Alright, so 1981 are halcyon days for the arcades. There's 2,400 arcades in the United States, 1.5 million machines out there, and people are pumping 20 billion quarters into them a year. And a new player comes onto the field, the Nintendo Playing Card Company, which has been making playing cards since 1889, and their name means leave luck to heaven. Think about it. So Hiro runs Nintendo, and he hires his son-in-law, who's also has a good track record of doing business in America, Mino. He hires him and he says, so I want you to sell our games in America. And he said, we got this hit radar scope, it's cleaning up in Japan, so I want you to sell it into America. So they set up an office there, and it completely bombs. No one wants to play it, it's a total wreck. So Hiro says, he calls the kid into his office who does the art on the side of the cabinets. This like 19-year-old artist kid, and he says, Shige, can you make a game? Because these engineers can't seem to figure out what is fun. And he says, oh yeah, I'd love to make a game, I have some ideas. One idea I have, it involves a gorilla, and I wanted there to be a carpenter, I think, who's trying to rescue his girlfriend from this gorilla. And in Japanese, I'm going to name this game after the gorilla, because he's the hero. I was going to call it Stubborn Gorilla. But we're making this for the American audience, so we need a good American name, something that will attract Americans. So let's get this Japanese-English dictionary over here. What's a good word for stubborn? Oh, donkey, okay. What's a good word for gorilla? Okay, Kong. We've got Donkey Kong. Great, Americans are going to love this name. Other characters are Pauline and, of course, Jumpman. Not yet. So, meanwhile, Mino's just getting his ass handed to him over in America. And his landlord calls him up and he says, you guys gotta get out of that factory, you owe me so much money. And he says, look man, cut me a break, I got Donkey Kong coming. And we're gonna make a shitload of money, we're gonna pay you back. And so he cuts him a break, and so Mino is very grateful to Mario, who goes on to become a politician in California. And Jumpman becomes Mario. And it becomes, really this puts Nintendo on the map, and is, after Pac-Man, one of the most profitable games of all time. And they actually, since they have so many of this like dead stock radar scopes, they convert 2,000 of the machines. You can see how the form factors are almost exactly the same. They just paint them and change some art. Get these things out of the factory. All right, so there's one other big player that happens around this time. Missile Command is there. This is more exciting than Missile Command. So, 1982, another bunch of MIT hacker nerds, they hack Missile Command and make a remixed version of it that they call Super Missile Attack. It's faster, it's harder, it has different enemies, and it just, sort of reinvigorates Missile Command. And so they say, well, what's another game that could really use some work? And they look at Pac-Man, and Pac-Man has a huge problem in it in its first creation, which is that there's no randomness involved at all. If you follow these patterns, you'll win every time, because the ghosts follow patterns, and people have it figured out, and they're just winning it. So first thing they do is introduce randomness. Then they make it 4 mazes instead of 1 maze. Then they say, oh, of course he should have legs. And what are those? And we're going to name him Crazy Otto. Now Midway, who's the American distributor for Pac-Man, hears about this, and instead of suing their asses, they say, you know, we don't really have a game coming soon that's any good, so we'll pay you to finish this right. But we want it to be a girl this time, and so let's call her Miss Pac-Man. And then someone says, oh, wait a second, there's a problem. Because in Act 3 they have a kid, and if she's Miss, they're not married. And that's not really acceptable. So she's got to be Mrs. Pac-Man. And then someone says, that's not very progressive at all. So we have Mrs. Pac-Man. And it's just too awesome. In 1982, 115,000 Miss Pac-Man machines are sold. This will be the most, this is the highest number of arcade cabinets ever sold in America. It actually didn't do that good in Europe, which is, who knows. So, June 21st, 1982 is sort of the legendary date when the golden age of the arcade games kind of went off the cliff. No one knows exactly why. Most likely, everything had just reached the saturation point, and so what was in 1981 an $8 billion business, by 1986 has cut in half to a $4 billion business, which is still a lot of business, but that's a lot of pain for a lot of people. But in this tail end, a lot of some of our classic favorite best games definitely came out. All of these were in the tail end of the golden age. Do I have enough run? I just think this is fun. Somebody called out. Jungle Hunt.
Pole position.
Nice. Stumped by the end of. All right. So manufacturers thought, all right, well, if we're not making money in the arcades, we can make some money at home. That's not going to work. So we're back a little bit earlier, 1978. The AVS is doing pretty good, reasonable. It's making money. It's not a huge thing, but it's making money. When someone says, hey, why don't we take that arcade hit Space Invaders and make a goofy version of it that runs on our thing? This is like a sea change idea. And so in 1980, we get Space Invaders for the Atari, and it is the #1 selling game of 1980. And as people say, all hell broke loose. Everyone wanted to get in this game. The Connecticut Leather Company, otherwise known as Coleco, throws the ColecoVision in. Mattel gets in there with their Intellivision. Milton Bradley comes in with the Vectrex, which I can't even get into explaining that crazy thing. A bunch of Atari employees, disgruntled with being treated so badly, start their own company, Activision, and make some of the best games there are for the 2600. And without debate, all of the best cover art. That's where that swoosh comes from for anybody. It's like, and Atari is worth $2 billion at this point, so they're really riding high. And in 1982, it's only going to go higher, because they're like, when we sell this Pac-Man cartridge, we're going to have more money than God. And it's the first cartridge software on its own that has its own national television commercial. But such is their hubris that they make 12 million cartridges when there's only 10 million consoles out there. That is only the first of their problems. The game, I mean, fantastic. You've seen it, right? It's utterly disappointing. It's a flickering mess. It's so droll. Screw it. And that's just the beginning of the problems, because for Christmas 1982, they released E.T. the extra. How many people played this game? Oh, wow, good. Alright, so, good lord, E.T. This is often referred to as the worst game of all time. It was produced in 6 weeks, which is, normally you have 6 months to make one of these games. And they printed 5 million cartridges before anyone had even played it, or play tested it. And really you spend most of the game just levitating out holes. It's horrible, horrible game. And Atari really starts to pay the price here. December 7th, 1982, Atari's quarterly report comes out, and it was expected that they would have 50% growth. That's what everyone was counting, that's what the stock market was counting on. When a report comes out, they only expect 10 to 15% growth, which is really devastating. Warner, in 83, loses $356 million. Atari themselves, they lose $536 million. which is just scrambling some numbers in this thing. And the legendary height of this debacle is they have so many cartridges that they can't sell and that they can't even give away that they end up burying 10 million of them in a desert landfill and then crushing them and then covering it over with concrete. And so this pit gets so bad that in 1984 Warner sells Atari to Commodore Computers. Basically gives it to them because they loan them the money to buy it off of them. Which makes sense because for all this gloom and doom talk, video games are thriving in another way on computers. And that's where they're, like software, video games are not dying, but the home console market is really in the tank. So, but it's not over. So in '83 in Japan, Nintendo got up the guts to make their own home system, and it was called the Family Computer, or more often referred to, the Famicom. And it was definitely more powerful than anything that was out there. But another big advantage it has were these shaped controllers, which you could play with for a lot longer, and it would still give you a cramp, but it was a lot better than the joysticks that were available for a lot of the other things out there. So in '85, Hiro calls up his son-in-law again, and he says, I want you to sell this in America. We're going to break the American market. And Mino says, no way, man. No way. It's impossible now. Americans, they just think video games are dead. And so he says, do it anyway. So he says, all right, okay, we have no hope, but who might be able to get this out there for us? Oh, Atari. So he calls up Atari and says, hey, you want to buy the Famicom? We'll call it an Atari console. And you guys know how to do this stuff, clearly, because you failed bigger than everyone. And so Atari looks at their situation and they say, we have the 7800 about to come out. Nintendo doesn't know this. So if our system does well and we buy the Famicom, we can just bury it. And then no one will even have to know it existed. But on the other hand, if the Famicom does well and the 7800 tanks, then we've got a safety hatch. So it's really all a win-win for them. So Atari totally agrees to buy the Nintendo. 3 weeks of negotiations, the deal's about to go through, and then all of a sudden, they get in this stupid scuffle over a version of Donkey Kong for the Coleco Adam, which is a computer that like nobody's ever heard of, and the whole deal falls apart. And it's probably for the best. But poor Mina's like, oh man, all right then, I'm gonna do it myself. That's just too fun. I just want to drop apes on everything with this. So he starts talking to retailers, he sets up at some consumer electronics shows, and he just keeps hearing over and over, video games are dead. Every retailer, KB Toys, Toys R Us, they're like, we took a bath on video games last year, we do not want to touch that stuff. And again, Americans don't like video games. And so he has to come up with a really clever marketing strategy, and there's two parts to it. One big part of it is he offered a money-back guarantee, which was unheard of at the time. So the idea was saying to the retailer, you know, you buy all these consoles, whatever you can't sell, I'll buy back from you. Which, like, he had to get his sign-off from his father-in-law on that one. But a huge, huge risk, but definitely one of the retailers got to lose. And his other idea was, it's not a video game. It's an entertainment system. And this is why this thing looks like what it does. They couldn't put a cartridge loader in the top because that makes it look like a video game. It's got to look like a high-tech, sophisticated VCR. Because that's what's high-tech at the time. That's an entertainment system, and that's why we're stuck with this horrible front-loading technology that... The other big part of it is, it's not an entertainment system, it's a robot entertainment system. Who said anything about video games? We're selling robots, people. And so, it works. And in Christmas 1985, you get the Nintendo Entertainment System Deluxe set, which, look at this thing. It's a huge robot. There is not a single image of a video game anywhere on this entire box, because it's a dirty word. Well, the kids know better, of course, but you're gonna shoot at ducks and fight with this grinding robot. So, the Nintendo does pretty well for the first year. It definitely gets his hooks in. It's not a big success until in 1985, Shige comes back in and designs this other game that some of you may have heard of, which of course is a smash. It just really takes things through. I mean, look, everybody loves Super Mario Brothers. Who can't love Super Mario Brothers? And groundbreaking in so many ways. It's It's pretty unbelievable. But then again, Shige comes back in 1987 and makes another game that was mildly popular. And yes, if you're wondering, this guy also made Star Fox. He also made... This guy is pretty much considered the greatest game designer of all time. He can pretty much do no wrong. And so, from 1986 to 1990, Nintendo has sold 30 million consoles in America, which accounts for 10% of the Japan-US trade deficit at the time. In the full life of the NES console, they will sell 60 million of them, not to mention Game Boy. And once they pair Game Boy with Tetris, it's all over. They sell 100 million of these. And so by 1990, Nintendo is just riding high. They're like, we are the kings of the world. We cannot be touched. Anyone, they're just like, oh, Sega, you know. But as you know, no king can reign forever. And that's all we have time for. If you want to know how much of a game nerd you are, I have a self-quiz and pens afterwards. You can come to your test. And if you want to leave it around, maybe we'll tally up and see what kind of nerds SAS fans are.